the new, let's say, season after the summer break. We are happy to see already a few of you connected, and hopefully we'll have a few more in the coming minutes, given that we have quite a few more registrations. Nevertheless, I will start slowly with the introduction, and then as I'm handing over to Cosmin, I think most people will be connected. So for those of you who are attending a first webinar organized by us, the e-delivery team, I'm Bogdan Dimitriou. I'm in charge of the e-delivery project at the European Commission in Digit. Of course, we are doing this together with our counterparts in DG Connect. And today, as I'm sure you all know, we prepared a webinar that will deal with a more practical introduction to how to use dynamic discovery with Domibus, which is the software that implements the e-delivery AS4 profile that we define in e-delivery, the sample software that we maintain under the building block. So with that, we could move to the next slide, Cosmin, if you could. And indeed, the webinar we are doing today is focused on the practical side of things. As you know, if you join many of our other events, we sometimes do more technical events, sometimes more business-oriented events. This is eminently a technical event. And furthermore, as I hope most of you read in the description of the event, it is designed for those who are already familiar with the basics of dynamic discovery as per the previous webinar on this hot topic that we organized last year. If you are not, you can still follow through, certainly, but you might have some difficulties with some of the concepts being discussed. And if that's the case, please, after the webinar, refer back to our recording of the previous one, which is more of an introduction to the concepts used in dynamic discovery. Cosmin, who will take over from me in a few minutes, will also take you through the precise scope of the webinar and also explain what the webinar will cover and not cover. But I want to do a slightly different take than he will do in a few minutes on this point, because I saw in the information you provided during the registration that you come to the webinar, some of you from several ecosystems that are either using already delivery or preparing to use e-delivery, and specifically use dynamic discovery with e-delivery in those ecosystems. I'm talking mainly about the once-only technical system, the FT upcoming ecosystem, and the European Maritime Single Window Environment ecosystem. So I'm not sure if everybody who registered from these projects is already connected, but I think it's important to let you know up front that today's event is organized by the e-delivery team. It does not have any subject matter experts from either the once-only technical system, the FT project, or the European Maritime Single Window one. Therefore, I think it's important, if you're looking especially for authoritative information about these ecosystems projects, however you choose to call them, domains, to make sure you follow their own events, the events organized by the respective domain owners, and rely on the information which is very specific to either of those domains, if that's what you're looking for. So today we are not able to answer any domain specific questions you may have about either once only or FT, or how to connect to FT gates, or how to get ECMR conformance, or how to deal with the maritime single windows. So all of these are questions which are larger than e-delivery, and we are very cautious not to provide wrong information, because as certainly you understand, we are not directly involved in those projects. We discuss with them on occasion, and we even attend some of their events. But today we are not able to answer specific questions. So to the extent that what you will learn today is applicable, and it is applicable to those domains, of course, it will be very helpful for you to see what we show. Still, please do not apply the let's say sandbox examples you will see today any of those domains with an expectation that it will work exactly in this way, because again, this is not the specific way to use dynamic discovery in any of those domains. Sorry for this rather long tangent, but I want to make sure that you have the right expectations from today's scope in order to not expect answers to questions that you will not get answers to. With that aside, there is another point I wanted to address very briefly. As you see from the title, from the event description, we are showing you something technical, which by nature has to be specific to a given product. And the product we can demonstrate, of course, is the only one we know sufficiently well to do so, and that is Domibus. And some of you have indicated that they are equally interested in how to do this also using other products and other solutions. And I would say for that purpose, we have an upcoming engagement with the solution providers of other products, where we will set up a process that will allow them to notify the e-delivery community, so you and others like you, of similar events like the one we are organizing today, focused on other solutions. And in this way, you can, of course, depending on the precise solution you are interested in, follow our newsletter, because this will become part of our upcoming newsletters. Follow our newsletter so that you can see if one of the solution providers organizes an event similar to this one to demonstrate the use of dynamic discovery in a different e-delivery conformance solution, then that's where you can get such information. From our team, of course, we can only present the solutions that we are familiar with, but we are aware that it's important for many of you to see also the same material from other solutions, and we are trying to set something up so that this becomes more visible also through the e-delivery channels, to the e-delivery community. So with that, I stopped the scoping, let's say, disclaimer that I wanted to make sure we do at the very beginning, and we can move to the next slide, which is more about the house rules. So Cosmin, if you could please, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen. So indeed you had, no, please go back. I was looking at a different screen, not yours. So the house rules, a quick reminder. First of all, the meeting is being recorded. Therefore, if you want to intervene, please make sure that you accept that your voice, potentially also your image, is part of the recording. In case you do not want to be recorded when you ask a question or when you intervene later on in the webinar, please tell us in advance so that we can pause the recording before this happens, before your intervention. And we will do so and let you know. Otherwise, if you want to ask questions, please do so in the Q&A function of WebEx. Please avoid asking questions in the chat, because it may be they may get lost between other information. It's much more straightforward to use the Q&A functionality for this purpose. And finally, later on, when we have the Q&A session, if you want to speak, please raise your hand. You cannot unmute or show your camera yourself, but if you raise your hand, we can do that for you. This is due to the format of the WebEx meeting we are doing. So raise your hand. We will unmute you and allow you to show your camera if you want. I think that's all I wanted to remind you of. Then we can move to the last slide of the introduction. Sorry, there are two more. So first of all, if you haven't already registered, meaning if you received the invitation to connect directly from us, most likely you've already registered. But if it was forwarded to you by somebody else and you have not gone through the registration, especially if you want to participate, please, we insist that you access the link you see on the screen and provide consent for us to process your personal data. Otherwise, it would be quite problematic. So again, if you haven't registered already, please do so during the event. It's perfectly fine. So we can indeed now move to the last slide of the introduction, where I wanted to introduce also the upcoming speakers. So you are already hearing from me. As I mentioned, I'm in charge of the project at Digit, and the next point on the agenda, where you will see the demonstration of how to use Dynamic discovery with Domibus will be done by Cosmin Baciu. He's the chief architect in our project. And then supporting the both of us during the Q&A session is Jose Richtasik, who is the lead developer of the Domi SMP and Domi SML, and of course, our resident expert on dynamic discovery in a general sense. So with that, I hand over to Cosmin for the next 50 minutes, more or less, of the webinar.
Thank you, Bogdan. Good afternoon, everybody. So before moving on into the details of the webinar, I would like to present you what we will cover as a brief overview. So we will start with the overview of dynamic discovery, a quick reminder what dynamic discovery is. Then we will register participants in Domi SMP, so our SMP implementation, and then we will check that the participants were registered correctly in SMP and SML. Then we will go and see how Domibus configuration will be done mainly in the P mode, properties, certificates, and then we will also do a comparison between static and dynamic discovery. After we'll finish with the configuration, we'll send some messages between two access points that we have using the WS plugin interface. And then we will play a little bit with the data which is registered in SMP, mainly with the receiver certificate and the receiver supported action, to see what are the side effects of, let's say, modifying the configuration in a wrong way. So we expect you to have an understanding of dynamic discovery. So during this webinar, we will not cover the fundamentals of dynamic discovery. For this, we invite you to refer to the video recording and the slides from the previous event. Then we will not cover the installation or the configuration of Domibus using static configuration. For this, we invite you to refer to the Domibus documentation and the hands-on webinars that we had in July 2022. Installation and configuration of Domi SMP also will not cover. You have plenty of material, videos, and the page and administration guide. As well, same situation for Domi SML. You have the page and the quick start guide. And we will not cover end-to-end use of dynamic discovery in a PEPAL context. We will briefly touch upon the configuration of PEPAL. So, what is dynamic discovery? It is an overview of two companies, original sender on the left side and final recipient on the right side. So this is the sender which wants to send a document to the final recipient, let's say an invoice. So the original sender will send the invoice through the backend of the first access point. It's its own access point, but it will indicate the unique identifier of final recipient. In this case is 008 participant 2. So it will put it in as a metadata in the message. And access point 1, based on this information, will discover the details of the access point which is used by final recipient, so participant 2. It will discover it via the two components. So service metadata locator, which wrote previously the details of the participant in DNS. So it will contact the DNS, and from DNS will get the URL of the SMP service metadata publisher. After this is done, then the access point will get the certificate, the public certificate of access point 2, the URL, and the party name. And then access point 1 can send a message to access point 2, which will be delivered to the final recipient, so participant 2, via the backend. So this is an overview of how dynamic discovery is. Then in the next slides, I will present you more into detail all these aspects that I just explained. As a recap, dynamic discovery has two profile enhancements: dynamic sender, which allows parties to be configured. So to allow parties to configure their access point to send messages to receiver parties which are not previously pre-configured. So these will be dynamically discovered as we have seen before. And dynamic receiver profile enhancements, which allows an access point to receive user messages from sender parties which were not previously registered, so unknown senders. And then I mean, these parties, these senders, the access point, the receiver access point, it doesn't know the identifier or the certificate. So what is required for sending messages using dynamic discovery? There are three main steps. So first of all, the first step is that we need to register the receiver participant in DOMI SMP. Actually, in SMP, during this webinar, we'll use DOMI SMP. Then we'll have to configure Domibus, the access point, so P mode, thruster, and the properties. And then we will be able to send messages between two access points using the WS plugin interface. Now we will start with the step one, so participant registration. And before doing this in DOMI SMP, I will just want to explain you what we will do using the DOMI SMP interface. So we will act as an administrator of the DOMI SMP interface, and we will register a participant in SMP. The SMP needs to have a trusted connection, so it needs to be trusted by the SML. So SML is, as you probably know, there is a central component which is responsible for writing participants into the DNS. So these participants, these requests are coming from SMP. And using the SML, the identifier writes into the DNS. So what we will do now, we will register a participant with this identifier into DOMI SMP, and I will show you in how to do that using using DOMI SMP. So I will authenticate using my SSO, and then I'll go to the groups. I'll go to the resources. As you see, I already have two participants that I prepared for this webinar, so participant and participant 2, but I would like to show you how to register a new participant. So I will create a new participant. I have already here prepared my values so that I don't have to type them. So this is the identifier of the new participant. Then I will provide the participant identifier scheme. These values, as you see, these are created and are specific for each ecosystem. So for this webinar, we have created some values, but these values are specific for each let's say ecosystem. For PEPL, there are specific values. For eHealth, specific values, and so on. So these are specific for each ecosystem. So now I have pressed the save buttons, and then DOMI SMP will register this participant via SML into the DNS. Then I will select my participant, and then I will you see that is already registered here. Okay, and then I will go to the resources. And then I will select my newly created participant, and then I will edit the document, which I have to create. So I need to fill in the service group. So this is an overview of the capabilities of my newly registered participant. So I will press the save button to save the service group. Okay, and then I will go and create sub-resources. So these are typically the capabilities of this participant. And for this, we will create a new capability. And this capability is here. I'll put the scheme. So there is a scheme that we created specifically for this webinar. And then the capability is invoice. So this participant will be able to receive an invoice. Okay, so I created my sub resource. Then I'll go and I will edit further my sub resource because we are not yet complete. And I will fill in the process identifier. So the process identifier scheme is, I have it here. Now fill in the scheme. And then I will take and I will copy the process identifier value. Okay. After this, we have to also configure the certificate. So this will be the public certificate of this participant, and it will be used by other senders to send the messages to this participant. So then, after I will do this, I will save, and then my participant is registered into the DNS and SMP. Now, if we want to verify that this is done, we will use maybe to present you first. We will use the dynamic discovery client. So this is a tool that was created to help you to discover and check that participants are correctly registered into DNS and SMP. So I will not go into details of this of all this documentation. You will have it as a resource in the presentation. Maybe I will show you here the commands that I will use during this webinar. So you see that the tool is correctly and then it has a very well documentation. So it has plenty of capabilities. So now, without further ado, I will go and I will demonstrate for you that my participant is correctly configured. Here I will use the participant 2, which was actually pre-registered by me for this webinar, and I will use the participant 2 to receive messages between the two access points. So first of all, I will check if my participant is correctly registered in DNS. So I will take this command here. I have already downloaded my dynamic discovery client. Okay, and then you see that we see that the participant was correctly resolved in DNS. So we have here the identifier, we have here the participant scheme, and we have here the domain in which we was registered. So for this the webinar, we have used this domain. And as an after record, you see here the URL of the Domibus SMP, where the participant details are stored. Okay, then we will see using the tool that the service group is also found. So I'll use this command. Okay, you see that the result was saved into the file called service group. And we see that it was correctly downloaded. You see the participant identifier, participant scheme, and the capability that we registered before as an example. And now we will see we'll fetch from Domibus SMP, we'll fetch the participant metadata. So we'll execute this command. Okay, and then we'll will display it here. You see that the participant metadata was correctly discovered and saved here. This is the one that we registered before in Domibus SMP. Okay, I'll come back to my presentation. So actually, this is what we did before. You see, have here the documentation and videos for how to use the dynamic discovery client. Now we will go to the step 2, which implies how to correctly configure Domibus in order to send and receive messages using dynamic discovery. So all the samples that I will show you here, so properties, files, P modes, and so on, you can refer to them either in the Domibus distribution or in the Domibus administration guide. Now I will explain to you what is needed to configure the P mode for a Domibus installation which acts as a sender, so a C2. So in order to do that, then we have to configure the services. So the service is the one that we have registered before for the participant 2. So these are the values that we have used. So we have to configure the service, we have to configure the action, and we have to create a leg configuration which is using these values. So you see that my leg configuration is pointing to the service that I created before. The action is pointing to the action which is created here. I have to define my participant. So this is the sender. This is the access point which sends messages. And then after I do all this configuration, I will have to create a process which actually aggregates and use this configuration, these values that I configure here, in and creates a process for dynamic sender. As you can see here, I only have the initiator parties. I don't have any responder party. So it means that when you will send a message, this process will match, and because there are no responder parties, dynamic discovery will kick in. Here's a similar configuration for Domibus, which acts as a dynamic receiver. So we have the same service, same action and leg configuration, but here I have my receiver access point, which is access point 2. And in the process configuration, we only have responder parties. So we don't have initiator parties, which means that this access point will receive messages by any sender which is trusted by this access point. And we'll see later on what does it mean. Now I will explain you how we got the values that we configured before. So the service and the action, how these values must be configured in Domibus in order to match the SMP service metadata. So the service must match the document identifier. So the service value must match the the service value must match the process identifier value. The service type must match the process identifier scheme. For action, it must match the document identifier. So you see there is a scheme and the value. They have to be set as an action with a double column separation. So this is how you map the service metadata values into the Domibus P mode. So we received during the survey we received the question how can I avoid configuring every message or document type in the P mode when further message or document types are added to the SMP, which is a very good question, and we have a partial solution. Partial because currently there is no support in Domibus for wildcard matching in the P mode. So we cannot, Domibus expects so it has in the matching process, it takes the values from the message and matches them against the configured P mode, but it expects these values to be one-to-one, so exact match. We are considering adding support for wildcard in the P mode matching because we think is a valuable proposal. The Domibus supports wildcards in the SMP document. So, for instance, if you register as a document identifier a value using wildcards, as you can see here, it will match the values, so the actions that are configured in P mode against the wildcard. So you see here we have URN DDC invoice and URN DDC credit note, and here we only have URN DDC wildcard. These values will be matched when C2 will send a message to C3. So there is no need to declare multiple registration in SMP. This is not currently supported in our IDE specification. This is only supported in the PEPL network. Okay. Then now I will present you how to configure the Domibus properties for the Oasis Dynamic Discovery. First of all, we need to activate Dynamic Discovery, and this is done in the Dynamic Discovery section in Domibus properties. So we need to activate it. We set this property to true. We configure the SML zone. This is specific to each ecosystem. Then we specify that we are using the Oasis client, Dynamic Discovery client, and then we have to activate Napter lookups. And Napter is used in the Oasis Dynamic Discovery. Actually, this is what is needed. So not so complex configuration. And I will present you now what is needed to configure the Dynamic Discovery using in PEPL network. Same, we have to activate Dynamic Discovery. We have to set this value for the SML zone. This is used for testing environment. So for production, you just remove the ACC. We set the client as PEPL, and because PEPL uses CNAME lookup, we have to configure the CNAME lookup type. Also for the transport profile, this value must be configured. Okay, then after we did all this configuration, we move on and we have to configure the thruster. So in this setup that we are presenting here, we will use a dedicated domain PKI, which means that the certificates are issued by a root authority. So in the thruster, we have to configure the root certificate, which issues all the leaf certificates we used in the ecosystem. So in this case, we are using a self-signed root certificate, and it must be configured here. And we have to trust the SMP, and this is the SMP root certificate. So why we have to trust the SMP? Because the access point will fetch data of the receiver access points, and it will update its own configuration. So in order to, for security purposes, access point must trust the SMP using the PKI infrastructure. Okay, now I will present you the configuration of the P mode, and I will do a comparison between static and dynamic discovery. So for static process, I think you are more familiar with it. All the parties, so initiator parties and responder parties, must be pre-configured in advance. So before sending any message, the details must be configured. So we have to list the initiators in this initiator party section, responder in the responder parties, and we have to provide the details, so the URL and the party IDs for each party using the static discovery. For dynamic sender. So when you are using dynamic discovery dynamic sender, we have to configure the initiator party, which is your own access point, but there are no responder parties configured because these are discovered at runtime. Here, the access point is the access point which sends the messages. So it's a simplified configuration. Here's the also comparison between static and dynamic discovery when when Domibus acts as a receiver. Our static process is the same configuration as before as dynamic sender, but for the receiver, you only have the access point which receives the message, your own access point configured here. There are no initiator parties configured because these are trusted based on the trust model. Okay, and the access point which receives the message must be also configured. Now, step 3, we are ready to send messages between the access points. And I will, before sending messages between the access points, I will present you that there are two, let's say, ways of sending messages using dynamic discovery. One is four-corner model, which is the most commonly used, and the one is point-to-point. So what does it mean, four-corner model? So these are this is an extract of the AWS plugin message, which is sent from C2 to C3, from C1 to C4 via C2 and C3. So you have to fill in the access point which sends the message, so C2. There are no two parties filled in, so no receiver parties fill in because they will be dynamically discovered. But we have to specify here as the original sender. So this is the C1, the company which sends the invoice, and here is the receiver participant, the receiver company. This is the identifier that we have previously configured in SMP. So when sending messages from C2 to C3, Domibus will take this value and the type and will perform the dynamic discovery lookup in SMP. We retrieve from SMP the identifier using the certificate CN value, the URL of the access point, and the public certificate of the access point. And then once it has these values, is able to send messages. With the dynamic discovery point-to-point model, it's a similar process, but instead of taking the receiver participant identifier from the final recipient, the identifier is taken from the two section, and based on this, it will act the same. So it will take this value, it will fetch the details from SMP, and then it will be able to send messages. So how now what do we need to send messages using the AWS plugin? As we have seen before, using the static discovery, we have to fill in the identifiers for the two access points, which are exchanging messages. So here is the identifier of C2. Here is an identifier of C3 party. With dynamic discovery, you only have to fill in your own access point identifier. There is party 2 here filled in because it will be automatically discovered from SMP based on the final recipient value. Okay, and now we are ready to exchange messages. So I will go and show you here my my SOAP-UI project where I have already an message already pre-filled in. So I will send a message from my access point 1 to access point 2, which will be automatically discovered in the participant by this with the help of this final recipient. Maybe it's better to show you exactly before sending messages the whole setup. Yes, so here, and I'll go here to the invoice. Okay, and then you see here, this is the sender, and the sender has this this endpoint and the certificate. The same, so here is the registration for participant one, so the original sender. Okay, and here's the metadata for the receiver. So this the final recipient will receive the message now, and this is the address of the receiver, the access point for the receiver. So 8880. So these access points are on my local machine now. And here's the certificate for the participant. Okay, so now I will go to my Domibus installation. Okay, and then I will send a message from my original sender one, so participant one to participant two. Okay, so the message was sent, submitted actually, and here you see that the message was acknowledged, so it means that it was sent successfully from access point one to access point two. So this was dynamically discovered, and here I have my my receiver access point, and we'll see that the message was received. See, the message was received from access point one to access point two via dynamic discovery. Okay, now, so this was a successful scenario. Now let's suppose that we will that participant two has a wrong certificate configured. So we will simulate this this scenario now. So I will go to my participant two. I'm there, and I will take a certificate which is not issued by the root CA. So this is like a self-sending certificate which is not related to the root CA. So we'll put here the wrong certificate of participant 2. We save it, and now we'll try to send another message. Okay. Normally this message should be heard. I see it tried to send a message. This party 2 it extracted from the wrong certificate, and it failed because the receiver access point does not trust this this certificate. Actually, the sending access point does not trust the certificate. Okay, so you see here that dynamic discovery works fine. Now we can also update. So we put back the correct certificate for participant 2. Okay. Save. Let's see that everything works fine this time. So we send another message. Go to my sender access point. This acknowledged correctly. All right. And then I will go and I will update. I'll put here a wrong value for the action, and we'll simulate that the capability of the so the message which is sent here, it will not match the values which are here are sent here are not matching the values, the capabilities of the receiver access point, receiver participant. So I will update here. I'll put different value. And sorry, not here. Here. Okay, and then if I send a message now, it should fail. No, actually, no, it should not fail because actually it did not submit the API is very slow today. Okay, so you see here that the metadata was not fetched, so it could not find the correct metadata because we have updated with the wrong value. So you see that varying the values from SMP has an impact on dynamic discovery. All right, and I think, yeah, I have a couple of slides which I left at the end to present you the trust models which can be used in dynamic discovery. So the first one is dedicated domain PKI, is the one that we have used in this webinar. So all the leaf certificates are issued by let's say a CA, a root CA. Then we have shared domain PKI, is similar with the one above, but in this one, the certificates, there is a shared CA, which is used amongst multiple ecosystems. In this case, there is a new additional enforcements that must be done, and there is a regular expression that must be applied on the certificate subjects. So in order to protect against sending messages, let's say trusting messages which were issued, for instance, for domain B when sending messages in domain A. Okay, then we have the mutual exchange, which is basically used when when the two access points have to exchange certificates among each other. So there is no dynamic discovery here. They have to pre-configure the certificates in advance. And the final one is the domain trusted list, which is actually the there are it's something which is called list of trusted list, and domain A, I mean, access points in can exchange messages if the certificates, the leaf certificates, which are used when receiving messages, are issued by one of the root authority from the list of trusted list. So the next slide presents has a more a little bit of description for what I presented before. Here I want to talk additionally about an improvement or a proposal that we are thinking to implement to use SMP to act as a trustor. So what does it mean is that the digital certificates can be issued by any certificate authority, and these certificates, of course, they must be registered in SMP. And how the validation of trust will be done. So when sending and receiving messages, the access point will consult the SMP as a trustor. So they will not use the local trustor like it was the case before. They will trust any messages which are signed by certificate coming from an SMP. And I think this is what I wanted to show you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cosmin. If you could go back just briefly to the previous slide, because I wanted to add a little bit of perspective, also given the ongoing discussions in a number of domains, some of which are represented here today. So what Cosmin already showed you, of course, is the technical process to use dynamic discovery. And a key question for us, for you, for everybody who is looking into dynamic discovery is, how does the receiver trust the certificate of the sender, or how does the sender trust the certificate of the receiver? Because As you saw, there are two sides to dynamic discovery. You have the part that is relevant for the sender and the part that is relevant for the receiver. So if you think about it, zooming out a bit from the technical details now, when you have the sender, if you are in a static configuration situation, the sender will install in advance the certificate it already trusts of the receiver. So this is done ahead of time, so to speak, and statically configured, right? When you move to dynamic sender scenario, so the first part of dynamic discovery, then the sender no longer has this certificate already pre-configured. Instead, it receives it from the SMP server. And this means there is a question, how do I, as a sender, trust that certificate? And what Cosmin used here, let's say, which is the most straightforward approach that can be taken, of course, and is taken in domains such as PEPL, is that the domain sets up a dedicated PKI, and there is a clear governance model attached to it, which says any certificate which is issued by this particular issuing authority and issuing certificate, signed by this issuing certificate, can be trusted. So then on the side of the dynamic sender, you can install this issuing certificate, which is what Cosmin showed you at the very beginning. In our case, for the demo, it was just a self-signed certificate, so just a random, let's say, root. But in a real ecosystem, of course, it would be a proper root CA of the dedicated CA. And then based on the fact that this is present in the trust store, then the certificate coming from the SMP will be checked against this issuer and accepted or rejected depending on the validity check. This is straightforward. I think it doesn't warrant a lot more, let's say, clarifications. However, of course, we understand, and that's why there are multiple models already present in our guidance on trust models, that this is not something that every domain will necessarily want to set up or choose to set up. Therefore, we try to see what can be used in case this dedicated domain PKI is not available. And then we move to a second model, and that model says, well, there is not a dedicated PKI. However, there is a shared PKI. This is a very, I mean, the typical example here, for those of you familiar with it, is the PKI service that eDelivery as a building block offers. Today, it is providing to you or to others who use it certificates issued by the ComiSign root authority of the Commission. So this is a commission, an EC issuing certificate, which will sign certificates for multiple domains. So if we have, let's say, a domain from, let's take once only technical system, even though they are not using the service, but just for the example, right? And FT, again, they are not using this service, but just for the example, then we would issue certificates both for once only technical system and for FT from the same root authority. So in order to distinguish between the two domains, that's where Cosmin was saying there is the option of putting a specific, let's say, text in the common name, which I would add is not an extremely secure solution. It is only as good as the governance that enforces it. But nevertheless, it is a working model, right, where you have this specific domain identification in the common name, and then you can check this in the access point with the regular expression. So you say, I only accept. So you put two conditions, in other words, right? You say we have the initial condition for the dedicated domain PKI. You say it needs to be issued by this particular issuing authority, but on top of that, it needs to contain this a bit of text in the common name. And then you can ensure that you will, an OOTS access point will not accept an FT access point and vice versa. So this is the concept of the shared domain PKI. Then, of course, mutual exchange, this is quite problematic because if you want to use dynamic discovery, presumably you don't want to distribute the certificates ahead of time, because that's the whole reason, or one of the main reasons why you want to use dynamic discovery, right? You want to discover the URL, the certificate, and the capabilities of the access point you want to send to dynamically. So if we if we go to the model of mutual exchange, this can be quite limiting when looking into dynamic discovery. Nevertheless, I would make a clarification regarding mutual exchange, because it can work in a, let's call it an asymmetric relationship, like to our understanding it is, at least is the case in FT. So in FT, the dynamic sender or the dynamic senders are relatively small set, the national authorities, and they can be configured in advance. So this means that whereas the receivers may be quite dynamic, because there could be what are called their FT platforms. So let's just refer to them generically as receivers. They could be receiving the data. I mean, there could be many private organizations that are certified to receive the data, right? And they could change from one week to the next, and it's quite impractical to have them configured statically. So here you have a bit of an asymmetric situation. It's not really a hub and spoke type situation where you have a single central point and then a number of other ones that it sends data to, but instead you have a number of central ones, but still it's a closed group and relatively stable group, which then can be configured statically on the side of the receiver. So in that sense, the receiver no longer uses the dynamic receiver part, so it is configured in other words in a static way, but still the dynamic sender is put into the architecture, because the sender can still detect the certificate and the URL of the receivers automatically. And in that case, you see there you would have a situation where you have a mix of trust models. So if you take the perspective of the sender still needs to trust the certificate it gets from the SMP. But there you would not really be in a mutual exchange situation, because again, then it would in essence make it irrelevant to use dynamic discovery. But instead, you know that there has to be a certification process in place in order for a receiver to be accepted in the network. And that means that you will either have a domain trusted list situation, or maybe a dedicated domain PKI, or maybe some external system that can allow you to validate that the certificate which is received from the SMP has been indeed issued by one of the trusted authorities, whatever that may turn out to be in FT. I think this is still very much under discussion, right? But in any case, you have on the side of the sender, you have the trust which comes from a national approach to how you certify these platforms. And then the SMP is simply a technical way to make the AS4 message exchange work. On the side of the receiver, in such an asymmetric scenario, however, you could still be in a static configuration situation, because you can pre-configure the 1 or 2 or 3 certificates that the national authorities would use at their FT access points, right? So these would change very rarely. So they are, I mean, it's quite practical that whenever the national access point changes, the authorities can inform all the potential recipients, let's say the 1,000 recipients that are certified about the upcoming certificate change, so that it can be statically configured in advance. So that would be hopefully a clearer example of how you would combine the trust model in such a mixed or hybrid usage, where the dynamic sender uses a domain trusted list, for instance, or shared domain PKI or what have you. And the receiver is not dynamic, and instead it uses mutual exchange. So hopefully this gives a bit more complexity or clarity on the possible combinations, right? And then coming back to what Cosmin was saying, but bringing it now to this example, of course, we realize that we already have the SMP, which may be a central component, or there may be multiple SMPs in a network. And then if we have the SMP, we may as well allow a domain also in a formal sense, because in a non-formal sense, I would say this is already possible, to act itself as a trust store. So at that stage, if you have an SMP which is governed and where there is a very tight control over the certificates which are published in that SMP in such a way that any access point that uses dynamic discovery trusts automatically any of the certificates coming from that SMP, then this facilitates, let's say, the combining the technical process of dynamic discovery with the trust setup in the domain. Of course, this will take some small software product changes, but these are relatively minor. I think the major issue will be how do you make sure that the governance is such that the SMP really can be given this level of trust. And this is not going to be any delivery solution, but it's going to be more of a domain solution to make sure that the organizational checks and balances are in place to ensure this. So hopefully this puts the trust models or the questions on trust models in a slightly bigger picture and links it a little bit to what you saw before that Cosmin demonstrated. I think this brings us indeed, as Cosmin already hinted, to the third point on the agenda, which had to do with any question and answers. So I'm not sure if there are already any in the Q&A. No, I don't see anything. So please, if you'd like to take the floor, please raise your hands, as I mentioned, so that we can let you unmute yourself or put a question in the Q&A, either linked to the presentation you saw or linked to dynamic discovery in a wider sense. I will wait for another minute or two to give you the chance to ask questions. Of course, if you don't have any questions, then we will close the webinar soon. Okay, so since I don't see, at least for the time being, any questions, I think my colleagues have enabled a quick survey that we are trying to ask you to reply at the end of each webinar, and I would kindly ask you to fill it in. While we do that, please, again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand or ask them. Thank you for the encouraging comment, and indeed, I hope that the absence of questions points to a clear webinar rather than to a very unclear one. Certainly, we do our best to make sure that's the case. Very well. I hope you've managed to reply to our survey, and we will be also interested in any further feedback from you. Cosmin, if you could please move to the next slide for our contact information. So this is, as usual, where you can register for news about such events and further. And then on the next slide, you will see contact details where, as usual, we invite you to let us know, even if you have some questions after the webinar or new ones, suggestions for what topics you would like us to cover in the future, etc. With that, I thank you all for joining us, and I wish you a good end of the afternoon.